Not just the presenters, but the entire Springwatch team would like to extend their heartfelt thanks to all of those key workers who are keeping us safe and secure throughout this terrible tragedy. You might be able to hear the foghorns going off all of those ships in the Solent not too far away from where we are now. I should add that Gillian wasn't clapping because she's very close to some beavers, and we don't want to scare them off before the programme because they could be the stars. Anyway, welcome to Springwatch 2020. It's a very different programme this year, very obviously. Technically, what we're trying to achieve is quite ambitious, so if it goes wrong, do please forgive us. But our mission remains the same, to bring you the very best of British wildlife. And we can start that tonight with this beautiful animal here. It's a queen hornet. Now, she has a nest in a bird box just outside our lounge window. But sadly this morning she flew in and we didn't notice her, and at lunchtime I picked her up dehydrated on the windowsill. So Megan and I have been rehydrating the hornet all afternoon. She's doing much better. You see, I love life, all life. For me, every little thing counts. It's not just about feeding the blue tits and the siskins, it's about the hornets too, because without the hornets, this community that I live in wouldn't be complete. And today's programme is about all of those little things that make our communities complete. Not that we're not going to focus on some super sexy animals, I can't say. We have certainly got some in the form of long-eared owls. Yes, in the nest, in daylight. What about that? Superb. And the chance, now that Gillian hasn't been clapping, of beavers potentially live in our programme. Goshawks, avian terminators, out there in the British woodlands. And of course we've got live nests too, a hub of those down in the Mendip Hills, and we can go live now to our blue tits. There's only one parent here, the female trying to rear these 3 little chicks. And I think at this point in time we've even got a live beaver. Yes! Gillian's silence paid off. Look at that. Swimming sedately across the surface of the pool down in the West Country. A live beaver. Hornets and beavers to start the show. What about that? That's pretty good, isn't it? But it's not just us that's been spotting, extraordinary wildlife this spring. A lot of you have been spotting the extraordinary amongst the ordinary. Looking out of your windows, visiting your gardens and the nearest green space, and engaging with wildlife in a way that you haven't done before. And sending us lots of pictures and also videos too. And to take a look at some of these, we've got a whole team of presenters, as you can see, scattered over the map here. Why don't we start off with the one and only Iolo Williams up there in mid-Wales.
Yeah, you are right, Chris. Our viewers have been out and about taking photos, and some of them are beautiful photographs as well, like this blue-tailed damselfly. Look at this, coming head on to a blue-tailed damselfly by Paul Browning there. Common damselfly, of course, on the wing at the moment, but it's not a common photo. Paul Browning, that is an absolute stonker. Thumbs up to you, mate. That is beautiful. And Gillian down in Cornwall, I believe you've been sent some stunning images as well.
Yes, we have, and it's all about the beauty in the detail tonight. And take a look at this photo sent in to us from Gary Watson in Norfolk. This is a crab spider. It's absolutely beautiful, so called because of the way it holds its legs out in a very crab-like posture. Now, they're a real thrill to come across these because they're not easy to find. They're usually perched on flowers, matched perfectly to the color of the petals. They're beautiful, but they're deadly. Take a look at this. Now this shows exactly what they do. They don't use a web, they use camouflage, and they wait for insects to visit the flower as they're collecting nectar and pollen, and they use a pounce, grab, bite strategy, and they inject their venom to subdue prey much, much larger than themselves, like you could see in that photo. So thank you to Luke Chambers for sending those in. Keep them coming.
Colourful crab spiders. Who says British wildlife can't be glamorous? It's all about the little things that rule the world. Tonight I'm going to be living the life aquatic and dealing with the little things that lie beneath here on the River Thames. But some friends of the show have been having more of a marine theme. They've been out diving in a spot that they dive often and have never before seen spiny seahorses, and certainly not 16 of them on one 100-metre stretch. They reckon if their air hadn't run out, they would have found many, many more. And some of these were pregnant, some of them were youngsters. To see them emboldened like this in amongst the seahorses, an animal that is just unheard of in their part of the world, is something really special. And they were positing that maybe this could be because of reduced disturbance from the reduction in marine traffic there in their area.
Superb stuff, superb stuff. And it goes on. People are still connecting with wildlife and collecting all of those photos and videos, and we would love to see them. So do send them to us at on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. We found this on Twitter yesterday. This is simply marvellous. Look at this. Ian Bailey took this video of his wife Jan helping some coots near Finsbury Park in London make a nest. Jan hands the coot a twig and it swims back and adds it to its nest. But then it turns straight round and comes back for another twig. Oh, it's great, isn't it? Isn't it great? Do you know, if I'd been helping a bird make its nest like that, it wouldn't just make my day or my month, it would make my year. That is absolutely superb. And a neat link, because down in the Mendips, where we've got our live hub of cameras looking at birds' nests, we've got a coot's nest. It's a first for Springwatch, and we can go to it live now. There you can see one of the adult birds incubating 8 eggs. Can't see the eggs, they're beneath the bird. And the nest is attached to a fallen tree that's stretching out into the water. Looks like that nest could do with a few twigs from Jan, to be quite honest with you. Their nests are pretty tatty and they do tend to fall apart. They're not terribly well woven together, which is why they're constantly adding material to them, I've got to say. But we've been watching these coots over the last few days, and when the devil's in the detail, look at the feet here. Look at those flanges on the toes of the coot, which it uses, of course, when it's paddling through the water. And here, I think you can see one of the pair coming in, look, yes, with nesting material, passing it to the incubating bird. You can sex them. That white crown that they have, which is attached to the beak, is bigger in the male, and males with bigger crowns are the more dominant. I would suggest, looking at that without being able to compare them too well, that the one on the nest there is the female. But look at this. It appears that one of the eggs has toppled out of the nest and she is pulling it back in. Or is there another explanation? Because coots are nest parasites. 50% of coots' nests have eggs laid in them by other females, and some of the females who own the nest are able to identify their own eggs and turf the others out. So perhaps the female turfed that out, and perhaps that was the male putting it back in. We'll have to keep a keen eye on those coots. Another nest that we've got down there in the Mendips, in the watery area, is this one. It's a reed bunting. And we can go to it live, and this will show you where it is. So here is the reed bed, typical reed bunting habitat. And if we pan across that and push down, you'll see that this nest is situated at the base of the reeds in a slightly drier part of the marshland. And there is the close-up view of it. You can see one of the youngsters there. There were 2 chicks in this nest. There were 4 eggs. But there were 2 in there at the moment. And look, maybe an adult's coming. It was reaching up and begging. Let's just hang on for just another second. Maybe not, it could have been something else. But we have again, obviously been watching them really closely, and we've seen both adults provisioning these youngsters. There's the male with that characteristic black head, the female bringing food in. They're always very cautious. They sneak into their nest, they never fly directly in. They're keen to hide its whereabouts from predators if they can. Great range of insect prey. They're taking caddis flies, stone flies, pretty much any inverts that they can find in amongst the reed bed. The female coming in here with yet more food for these youngsters. And they'll be in the nest between 12 and 14 days, and they hatched a week ago. So they've got about a week to go before they fledge. We will definitely see them fledging. But look, she goes to remove a fecal sac and eats it. It does happen from time to time. It obviously can't do her any harm. Nothing could have been put into those feces that she doesn't know about. So it's an interesting thing to do. Of course, the male flies off and dumps his. Reed buntings played a formative role when it came to my, passion for birds. Way back in 1973, on a Sunday afternoon, we went down to Titchfield Haven, down that way about 40 miles, and my dad found a reed bunting's nest, and he allowed me to peep into it and look at the eggs. And they were absolutely beautiful. And he made me wait, and then I went back a second time, and I had to wait so I didn't disturb the bat, and went back a third time. And the pattern on the egg, I can still remember. I drew that pattern this afternoon on here. Now, I can't say it's exactly right, but that's what I remember, that delicate little bit of scribbling written on the inside of a bird, transferred onto its egg and laid in a nest. It blew me away. And I was really keen on finding nests after that and looking at those little marvels, the eggs inside. And I'm not alone when it comes to that habit. Yolo Williams is another keen nest finder, and he's been looking for nests in his garden and the immediate surrounding area. Yolo.
I'm very lucky in that I live in the Welsh countryside, and it's a lovely mix of rolling hills and woodland and hedgerows, perfect habitat for British wildlife. But I don't have to go very far to find it, and I suspect some tenants have moved into my back garden for the spring. Now, since I was a child, I've been fascinated by birds' nests and finding the nests. The best way I find is to listen for singing birds. It'll be the males singing to advertise their territory. Now, at the moment, I've got a singing dunnock, so I suspect somewhere in this section of the garden, I've got a nesting dunnock. It doesn't take me long to find it, buried deep inside an evergreen bush. It's important not to go poking around and disturbing the nest, so I'm sitting back and settling in for a bit of bird watching. When a female dunnock has finished lining her nest, it's a sign that she's ready to mate. And you might think that being garden birds, there'd be a male and a female, and they'd be faithful. Oh no, the dunnock's sex life will make your eyes water. Dunnock territories will overlap, and the female will mate with other males so that she believes they will help her to rear the young. But understandably, it's a strategy the other males are not keen on. And they will often peck at the cloacal opening of the females, encouraging them to eject the sperm of the other males. It's incredible. The saucy dunnocks may have set up shop in my garden, but there's another bird whose morals, home life and building skills couldn't be more different. There's a pair of long-tailed tits that's calling this hedgerow home. And here it is. What a nest. It's got to be my favourite of all the nests, the nest of a long-tailed tit. And they're very modern in their approach to nest building too, because the male and the female take part. And it pays dividends, because look at that. It's made of moss, it's made of hair, it's made of wool, it's made of hundreds of feathers, and because they also use spiders' webs, they can stick lichen on the outside as camouflage. Isn't that amazing? But that's not the only reason that they use spiders' webs. They also weave it into the nest. Now in there, the female will lay anything between 6 and 12 eggs. There's plenty of room when the eggs are there, but when they hatch and the chicks grow, there isn't. But because they've woven the spider silk into the nest will expand. These really are the structural engineers of the bird world. A big clutch may mean a lot of clever construction for the long-tailed tits, but it pays off when it comes to child-minding duties. It's common to see more than the pair tending a nest. The helpers are extended family members who've lost their own young. Many hands, or beaks in this case, make light work. There's one other new nest in the neighbourhood, but it's rather easy to overlook. Now, if there was a prize for the best camouflage nest in and around my garden, it would have to go to this nest. This is a wren's nest. And it's a typical wren nest as well. It's like a small football with a hole in the middle there, tucked out of the way on a hedge bank like this, very well hidden. But this is what we would call a cock nest, because the male is the one who builds the nests. He doesn't build one, he'll build 4, 5, 6, maybe more nests. Then he takes the female around, and it's the one that catches her eye that they will line, and well, she will then lay her eggs. But if you do find a nest like this and it's empty, leave well alone. Because yes, they might be using another nest nearby, but they will rear a second brood as well, and they may well use a nest like this. But that's the wren, the busiest bird in the avian world. Birds' nests come in all shapes and sizes, and not only beautiful, but ingenious too. And I feel genuinely privileged to share my garden with these amazing creatures. Now, when you're out and about, you see a common or garden bird, think about the incredible structure that it's about to build. And more than anything else, give them space. Birds need peace and quiet. It's all very well being a nosy neighbour, but nobody likes their home disturbed, especially the birds. Those dunnocks, eh? What can I say? Well, actually, I've got some very good news for you, because that dunnock nest, well, they laid 4 eggs in there. Only 1 chick hatched, but it's the fattest dunnock chick I have ever seen. It was so well fed. It fledged successfully. The parents then built another nest. They laid 4 eggs, and 3 of those has hatched. And as I speak to you now, they're feeding those 3 chicks. And this time of night here is beautiful, because all around me, we have got house martins circling around, calling non-stop. There are 2 birds tucked just under the eaves here, as if they're having a little bit of a chat before they go to bed tonight. Look at them, curled up there, beautiful birds. And earlier on, there was a cloud of them around my head here. Some of them feeding on insects, some of them carrying mud back to build that nest. And it took me back to being a little lad again, because we lived in a house where we had 2 house martin nests tucked under the eaves, and one was just outside my bedroom window. I used to leave my window open every night so I could just listen to those birds. And for these birds, like for all of us, it's about passing our genes on to the next generation. And birds have evolved different strategies to try to ensure that their offspring survive. Let's take our garden birds, our common garden birds, the birds that you and I are familiar with, that are nesting, that are feeding in our gardens, our blackbirds, our robins, our goldfinches, our song thrushes. When these chicks hatch out, they're pretty ugly, let's be honest. They're virtually naked, they're unfeathered, they are reliant on the parents for their food, and they are reliant on the parents for virtually everything. They cannot even regulate their own temperature. Look at this bullfinch. The adult male is beautiful, but the chicks, it's going to take them a while in there. Some of these are reliant on the parents in that nest for a couple of weeks, some for several weeks. Some of the bigger ones, like the eagles, for several months. It's remarkable, but that's one technique. But there is another technique as well, and this is one that's been adopted by game birds, by ducks, and also by waders, like the ringed plover. Now here you see that the youngsters are very confident once they hatch out of that egg. Their vision is superb. They can walk, they can run virtually immediately. They can react with the parents, so they are less reliant on those parents for survival. They can even feed themselves. And these are known as precocial chicks. Now, scientists have known for quite some time that for precocial parents, that they communicate with a developing embryo in the egg. They will call to them constantly. The chicks become imprinted on that adult's call so that when they hatch, the adults call them away, the chicks follow. But it was thought that the altricial chicks, that it didn't apply to them at all until recently. Research in Australia on this bird, the zebrafinch. It's quite a common bird inland out there on the grasslands of Australia. Typical finch with that big bill, the male on the left with those beautiful orange cheeks. Well, what scientists found was that when they're in the nest, when they are feeding the young, and when the temperatures reach an average of 26 degrees Celsius in the day, the parents' calling changes. They emit this high-pitched call. Here's the call for you now. Listen out for it. There's the call there. Can you hear that high-pitched call? They emit that call every time they come into the nest. What happens? Well, those eggs hatch, but the chicks, when they eventually fledge, are smaller than your average chicks. And this is a brilliant reaction to the weather around them, because if you're smaller, you have a greater surface area ratio to body mass. That means that you're able to lose heat more effectively, that you're able to combat those hot weather conditions. And isn't it remarkable that the parents, when the embryo is in the egg, are forewarning them about the climate that they are going to face when they leave that nest? Nature is miraculous. It's that time in the evening now when we come to a mindful moment. Come over here with me, stop everything that you're doing, put everything down, and for the next minute and a half we are going to give you just poetry in vision. No talking, no music, just pictures at their very best. The sounds and sights of spring. And this time it's the turn of cameraman Robin Smith, who's been out filming the River Wye as it flows past his home in Wales.
That is the gorgeous Wye Valley, and I'm in a beautiful valley as well in Cornwall. I'm in Woodland Valley Farm, home of Cornwall Beaver Project, and we're here because it's an amazing opportunity to study these incredible animals, their ecology, their biology, the fact that they're ecosystem engineers, that they actually shape and create their own habitat for the benefit of a whole host of other species. But they're not the only ones. There are other architects and engineers too, hidden down below. That's because soil is its own amazing, thriving habitat in its own right. So let's get to know some of its principal engineers. And that is the humble earthworm. Now, there's several species of earthworms, but the beauty of these are that even in lockdown, even if you don't have a garden, you're never very far. It's not difficult to find earthworms, no matter where you are in the country. And I really urge you to take a really closer look at these because they can lead you down a wormhole of discovery. There are 29 species of earthworms in the UK, and each one occupies its own ecological niche, and it has its own role in the soil cycle. The species at the surface kickstart one of the greatest recycling processes in the natural world, with the simple act of drawing down leaves down into the ground. And what's quite astonishing is that they can do this with no appendages, no obvious external features. So how do they do that? Well, to find out, we've got to follow them underground and take an even closer look, because tiny microscopic structures are revealed. Little bristles that line the length of the body, hooks and grabs that they used to anchor and wedge themselves, their bodies, as they drag the leaves down from the surface. And they also have bristles round their mouths, which they use as sensory organs to direct their behavior. They don't have eyes, but they have light receptors. And they don't have lungs, but they breathe through their skin. So they sound really alien. But actually, if you get past those first impressions, things start to get quite familiar. Now, this is the basic body plan of an earthworm. And the food, whether it's leaf litter or other detritus, enters the mouth and is passed via the esophagus to the crop, and it finds its way to the gizzard, which is very similar to like in birds. So in earthworms, there are these microscopic grains that grind up the food, and then that's passed down to the intestine where nutrients are absorbed into the body. So that's actually, like I said, quite a familiar story, a familiar body plan. And actually, we share a lot more in common with earthworms, and you might realize we share almost 70% of the same genetic material with earthworms, which is quite extraordinary, but not the most important part of the story, because it's what happens next that really counts, and it's what leaves the anus. That's because what earthworms excrete is incredibly valuable. They are able to concentrate nutrients through their bodies, so what comes out is 10 times more nutrient rich than what goes in. And what they create is some of the most essential building blocks for something that is essential for life on Earth, and that's soil. And they not only create the raw materials, but they help to create the structure as well. So as they burrow and tunnel and excavate their way through the soil, they secrete this slimy secretion which helps to lubricate the worms as they move through the soil. Now, long after they've gone, this secretion sets and it holds open the tunnels, so it allows nutrients and water and air to flow and circulate through the soil. But not just that, it creates a superhighway for a whole host of other soil microorganisms and microbes. And it's incredible because it's so numerous that just 1 tablespoon of soil can contain as many as 7 billion individual organisms. That's almost as many as there are people on Earth. So the next time you come across an earthworm, take your time to stop and really enjoy the magic of these incredible creatures and really think about what they do under our feet. And it's not just the nutrient-rich soil on land. A muddy seabed can also be a host to a wealth of wildlife, as we discover as we delve underwater.
More than 90% of our seabed is simply sediment. Swathes of sand and mud, stretching from the coast way out into the depths. It may look deserted down here, but marine muds and sandflats are often sheltered, full of nutrients, and home to a myriad of life. The warmth and light of spring act as a trigger to many of the residents here. And for a fish that usually does its best to melt into the background, it's time to be noticed. This male sand goby has built himself a sandcastle. And in the heart of the castle, he's built a nursery under a seashell, which he keeps in tip-top condition, awaiting this year's young. Now this king of the castle must protect his land from trespassers, but most importantly, must attract a queen. And, ever practical, he's made himself the perfect stage. With an audience settling in, it's time to put on a show. He gets his waggle on and sings a low drumming sound, showing off his size. Fish have evolved more ways of generating sound than any other vertebrate. And it looks like it's working. Or not. Time for a quick interval before the second half and the big finish. A final flourish, but she's off. Today just isn't his day. In these flat, open landscapes, sometimes it pays to stand out. Few do it in as much style as the rare fireworks anemone. An extravagant explosion of color and form in the gloom. The size of a dinner plate, they extrude from a soft tube that extends over 1 meter into the sea floor. Up to 200 long, delicate tentacles rise into the water column, capturing their planktonic prey on microscopic harpoons, running them one by one through their central corona of mouth tentacles. These rare beauties can live in sheltered waters where the softest of mud collects. A precious habitat where even rarer treasures can be found. If left untouched for decades, one species can erect a structure of dazzling detail. These are serpulid reefs, one of the world's rarest habitats. Named after the architects who secrete them, these coffee table-sized conglomerations are formed by colonies of tube-building fanworms. A carnival of red, white, and yellow. A show as good as any on Earth. Their delicate fans are used not just for filter feeding, but they even have their own kind of eyes, watching out for looming shadows, ready to make a quick retreat. Mud and sand may not seem to be the most glamorous of backdrops, but these sedimentary superstars certainly know how to put on a show.
Did you see that fireworks anemone? What an organism! What an organism! What about it when it went like that and opened up? It was quite extraordinary. You don't get that at the Folie Bergère. What an amazing animal. Now listen, when it comes to very loud animals, you might think of something like this. That is a bolving red deer stag at 98 decibels. But the loudest animal in the world is a sperm whale, which pumps out sound at 220 decibels. You see, sound at ground level like this travels at 343 meters per second, but in water at 1,048 meters per second, much faster and much further. So it's not surprising, as Gillian just told us, that fish have come up with more ways of producing sound than any other vertebrate animal, because sound is a perfect way to communicate in that watery medium. I'll tell you what, let's take another look at those gobies and listen to them without the overdramatic music. You can hear that grumbling, rumbling sound. But how is it being made? That's the question. Very difficult to discern if you're underwater diving. So, some scientists at the University of Liège decided to experiment. They put some gobies into a tank and they put in a microphone. Listen to these gobies. Sounds a little bit burpy, doesn't it? But it's not burpy. Initially, we thought they were producing that sound by squeezing water out of bones that surround the gill. But it turns out that we were completely wrong. When they investigated, they found that underneath the cheek of the goby is a special muscle called the levator pectoralis, which can vibrate at up to 60 times a second, 3,600 times a minute. And when it does so, it shakes the shoulder bones of the goby, and it's that produces the sound. But they have an extra appendage which helps, namely their fins here. And we think that the membrane on the fin acts like the membrane on a loudspeaker, amplifying the sound. And furthermore, because they can move the fins like this, they can point the sound in the right direction of that female. And what we find is that the louder the goby, the longer the goby. And the more frequently they produce the sounds, the bigger and fitter they are. So this allows the females to figure out which are the fittest gobies and choose their mates properly. But gobies aren't the only fish that produce sounds. We don't get to see gobies too often, but there is another species that we do see quite a lot of, which is very vocal. Listen to this. Typically, of course, these fish are on your plate. But before they get there, they're doing remarkable acoustic things under the water. Yes, those are haddock, and they're producing those sounds by vibrating muscles alongside their swim bladder, that buoyancy aid that all fish have. It's principally the males that do it, and they have territories on the sea floor where they'll battle with one another acoustically and also attract the females to come down, choose them, and then they swim up into the water column where they spawn. But you know, my favourite fish sound story is this one. In 1994, the Swedish military were listening using hydrophones to submarine traffic moving past their coast, and they heard this. Something they'd never heard before, something they thought was a new class of Russian submarine. The Prime Minister of Sweden wrote to Boris Yeltsin to ask him what was going on. I'm not sure whether he got a reply or not, but what I do know is that a few years later, those military people played the sounds to a marine ecologist. And he said, "That's not a submarine at all. That is herring farting." Oh yes, oh yes, it's herring farting. And in 2004, Ben Wilson from the Scottish Association of Marine Science found out that the reason that they're farting and producing these sounds is to warn each other of danger. So when herring are being attacked, they all fart to tell one another that they're in trouble. I'm not going to try that in human form, I can probably tell you that. That's not going to be the case. But what a remarkable thing that is. What a remarkable thing that is. I love that story. I love that story. Bit of Cold War fish farting. I tell you one thing though, Steve, up there in the Thames, I can pretty much guarantee that there's no farting going on. Not in a river of such great repute.
Well, there may not be any flatulence from the fish, Chris, but that doesn't mean there's no gas here. Actually, I have to say that that actually really reminds me of diving with Goliath grouper, which have the ability to twang their swim bladder and create a sound that's really good to ward off other creatures. In fact, they use it to get rid of silky sharks. That's their actual name, not their description. There was a time when to wade around in the Thames like this would have been taking your life in your hands. Certainly in the 1950s, the Thames was declared a biologically dead river. That's obviously mostly down to the stretch that goes through London and the tidal Thames, but even the middle and upper reaches where we are now, mostly due to industrial runoff and pollutants from farming. You know, even in the last 10 years, about 1 billion tonnes of untreated sewage have been pumped into this section of the Thames by the water companies. If you live on or near the river, or you swim in the river, trust me, you know about that. Just ask David Walliams. It has taken a Herculean effort by conservation organisations and by the Environment Agency to clean up the Thames' act, but it has worked. And now this river is a jewel in our national natural crown. Sounds and sights like this are 10 a penny. Sightings of otters are on the increase along the full length of the Thames. Certainly we see spraint and feeding signs here where I am now, although I haven't yet seen an actual otter here for myself, although I very much live in hope. This is now one of the cleanest urban rivers found in Europe, and that's even more remarkable when you consider that 1/5 of the UK's population lives within the Thames River basin. The amount of pressure that amount of people put on the river must be absolutely phenomenal, but there are now 125 different species of fish found here in the Thames, and that's things like perch and pike and barbel and tench, and dare I even whisper the possibility of salmon. We very certainly have eels, I can tell you that for sure, because I filmed one from my kitchen window being swallowed whole by a cormorant. This is not actually unusual, though it looks really, really uncomfortable, this cormorant trying to devour that eel whole. It looks a little bit like my toddler trying to swallow a banana in one go. And then 2 days after I filmed this, one of my neighbours got in touch to say that a cormorant had been disturbed mid-eel meal, had flown, taken off, regurgitated that eel, and it had bounced off his window, which kind of sounds like something that the mighty Boosh would write. Since the days of destructive dredging, the Thames is a little bit messier around the edges, and that's a good thing because that encourages little microhabitats. In the lee of overhanging vegetation like this, you get a build-up of organic sediment, and that's really good for aquatic insects and for, well, things like these, freshwater mussels, which are now absolutely everywhere. And also, of course, they provide a haven and a nursery for fish. So fish can breed here and you can have their youngsters. If you look around in the shallows, you'll see dozens, hundreds of fry. And these little swimming fish are having their nurseries in here along the edge of the river, and they will eventually grow into, well, some of them at least, the larger, big, mature fish, if they can escape the attentions of all the predators that are here now gathered to feed on them, and they are here in their dozens. I have to say that when I first started kayaking down this stretch of the Thames about 20 years ago, every single sight of a kingfisher was a cause for celebration. Now we see, or at least hear them, every single day. The whirring buzzing of their wings as they scoot low and hard and fast over the surface of the water is probably the favourite sight of just about everyone on this river. And the river itself, it is clear. The water is clear, it is oxygenated, it is clean. Now, I might not be about to suggest that we start bottling it for something like Peckham Spring, but it is undeniably a flourishing ecosystem. And that also includes lots of small fish. Any of you who are particularly eagle-eyed may have noticed that those birds were pretty much all feeding on one unlucky fish, our most numerous, and that is the minnow. So even fully grown, they're no bigger than my little hobbit finger. And it's quite a drab, unassuming little fish, certainly for the majority of the year. I mean, its name is kind of synonymous with underachiever until it comes to the breeding season, and then everything changes. So due to carotenoids in their diet, they can take on a vibrant red blush over the belly, over the fins, and these deep, rich colours. That's also supplemented by white horns over the front of the head and over the gills. These are called tubercles. They're created out of a protein called keratin, the same protein that we have in our fingernails and in our hair. And if you just look really carefully there at the front end of this male minnow, you'll see those tubercles there. This is a classic secondary sexual characteristic. This is something that it's using to show off to the females. And they'll supplement that with a waggle dance, which they do out in the open. I guess it's kind of saying, look at me, if I can stand out here in full view of the predators and dance for you, imagine how fit I must be. Imagine the youngsters that I would be able to sire. Now, I guess the river here is definitely bouncing back, but this is not a done deal. In place of the challenges that we had in the past, the pollutants, the sewage, the dredging, now we have new challenges. We have invasive species, we have climate change, we of course have plastics, microplastics, microfibers. You know, we still have to work so hard to keep the Thames in the condition it's in. But if a river like this that was functionally dead can rebound, then surely we have no excuse. There is no excuse for not wanting to bring back any denuded habitat here in the UK. It can be done. Chris, seeing those signs of horny minnows, did it give you some nostalgia? Did it take you back to your childhood?
Very much so, yeah. Although not my childhood, I still go out catching minnows and things like that now, Steve. Now, we're concentrating on the little guys today, and I can tell you that inside this tree is the larvae of a goat moth. They can spend up to 5 years inside the tree, feeding on the wood. How do I know it's in there? Well, I know it's in there because it's exuding a fermented sap. Its excreted materials are oozing out of the bark. But how did I find that? Well, I found it because queen hornets have been visiting it. Lots of insects are drawn to this sort of alcoholic brew that's oozing out of the tree, things like butterflies or the hornets. They've been in and out the whole time Steve was talking. Not one live here at the moment, but here's one that we recorded just a few minutes ago. Now, quite what they're getting out of that sap, I'm not entirely sure, but it's a remarkable phenomenon. And during the course of the afternoon, I reckon we've had 4 or 5 queens coming in and taking this material. Fantastic stuff. Now, when we rocked up the Springwatch team at Minsmere in 2016, we expected the stars of our show to be things like marsh harriers and bitterns and bearded tits. But oh no. No. The star of that year was undoubtedly a 5-centimetre fish, the one and only spineless sai, one of Michaela's all-time favourites.
We've set up our very first ever underwater nest cam, and it's down here, just under the boardwalk. You can see the camera there, and we've got a hydrophone to get the sound as well. It's the nest of a stickleback. That's what a male stickleback should look like. This is what ours looks like. He's not quite so resplendent, is he? He's only got 2 spines as well, so we're actually calling him Spineless Simon. He makes a little nest in the reed beds, but yesterday there was a disaster when an otter came into the water and trampled all over it. And it left our poor little stickleback completely crestfallen. We had this great comment, I love this, from Jess Button, who said, "Spineless sai and Otterzilla, the finest tale there ever was. I'm actually crying."
Well, we found him as soon as the silt had settled, as it were, and immediately he started to look around for a spot to build a replacement nest.
I think he's moved and upgraded. I think he's doing a better job this time, actually.
Oh, it's quite nice. I mean,
Oh, but what is that? Is that like some sort of jacuzzi, Chris?
that's a jacuzzi to attract the ladies. We think that it's decomposing plant matter.
getting the females to come and have a look at his nest, but he hasn't had any real success. Yesterday, 9 rejections. Poor old spineless Sigh. But you know what, Chris? He's got quite a fan club. He's got his own Twitter account.
I've heard.
Well, the stickleback on camera number 9 has been nicknamed Spineless Sigh, and he's just here. And there are people leaning over the wooden railings of the walkway who are fascinated by him. Have you been watching him on TV?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Why is it capturing the public imagination, do you think?
Well, it's not something you normally would even think to look for. To actually see something about the real life cycle of the sticklebacks is great.
These reed beds are a dangerous place for a little stickleback. We've already seen a heron eat a stickleback. Cormorants will also have a go.
Then, on Thursday, one of our viewers had taken this photograph of a bittern, and that's right next to the camera where Spineless was hanging out. And then Spineless disappeared. We didn't know what happened. We put another camera down in the stream. We tried to find Sigh.
There he is, looking very resplendent.
Things have changed. Look at this. Eventually, he gets this female back, and in she goes. He could have made it a bit easier, but she goes in. But once he's got one success, he just can't stop, it seems. Here are the eggs.
That is
and
incredible.
he goes in and fertilises them.
The nation is at home. Oh, yes, he made it.
He's fanning away, doing a brilliant job supplying that nest with oxygen. But they have got a problem, and it's the sunshine. You see, it's been really, really warm here today. We tested the water temperature, 20 degrees C. It might develop the eggs more quickly, but they're going to be starved of oxygen.
They're going to have to fan, aren't they?
So if we continue to have really hot weather, he's going to have to be fanning like mad. And I'll tell you one other thing, Michaela.
Yeah.
Last year, down on the boardwalk there, by this time, it had dried up.
Oh, no. Fortunately, the heavens opened, and as you can see, there's plenty of water there. I was down here at the weekend, and there were loads of kids taking selfies of them with Sigh in the background.
What we really want him to do is hatch his fry.
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing?
And what happened today? We saw this. Get off your sofa, run up to the screen. Yes!
It's popped out, it's popped out! Look at that! Oh, my word!
You see it there? You can see it?
Yes!
And
There's
another
one! Oh, I don't believe it. In the last hour of the last programme of this series, it's a happy ending.
Do you know, I'd forgotten just how big Spineless Sigh was. Every newspaper, every radio station, TV station, rumour has it, he was lined up to present his own show. Space the Spinal Frontier. No, I'll sack my comedian, don't worry, don't worry. Anyway, I can't promise you Spineless Sigh, but what I can promise you, some fabulous Welsh nests. Not up in Montgomeryshire here, where I am, but rather down here in southeast Wales in Monmouthshire. And we gave you a tantalising glimpse of one of these nests yesterday. It's the nest of the firecrest. Here it is, 20 foot up in a pine tree, and it's slung beneath that branch, almost like a hanging basket, woven into some of the twigs there, which means that it's protected from rain showers, but it is quite susceptible to high winds. And it's impossible for us to see in. It's a deep cup, but they usually lay 7 to 10 eggs. We'll have to wait in the hope that it's successful for those eggs to hatch and for the chicks to appear before we can assess exactly what's in there. Now, some of you might be watching and think, that looked a lot like a goldcrest to me. How'd you tell the difference? Well, let's compare the two. Let's have a look at them side by side, and we'll pick out the noteworthy points. See the gold crest there on the right? Well, look at the fire crest. It's a flame crest there. Look at that. And also look at the pattern on the face, that dark line going through the eye and then a broad white stripe above and below that dark line. Fantastic. And of course, we will be following that nest in the hope that it's successful over the next 2.5 weeks or so. We also have other nests, including a long-eared owl nest. Now, so far we've seen this nest in daylight, and what we've seen every time is a mother brooding 3 youngsters. There they are in the evening sunlight. Beautiful bird, stunning bird. But I'm pleased to be able to say that the lads down there, Steve and Al, they've put up an infrared camera and some infrared lights, and we can now see the birds at night. And of course, these are strictly nocturnal, so at night, the adults are away hunting, especially the male, be hunting out over the open moorland looking for mice and voles and small birds. And here comes probably the female. The male provisions the female. She brings the food into that nest. If you listen carefully, you can hear the calls, likened to a squeaky gate. If you move a gate, an old rusty gate back and forth, that is the call of the chicks. The oldest chick there now is about just over 3 weeks old. Here we are, the adult coming in. Hear the deeper hoot of the adult? If ever you're looking for long-eared owls, listen for those noises. And that oldest chick there now is just over 3 weeks old, and usually now they'll start branching. That means that they don't fledge, but they walk out onto nearby trees. But that tree is quite isolated there, so I don't think it can step onto another tree. So hopefully they'll be confined to that area for the next week or maybe even 10 days or so. What a cracking bird. Chris, have you ever seen a long-eared owl's nest?
I've never seen a long-eared owl's nest. You know what? I live about 100 metres over there, Yolo, and a couple of years back, I heard that squeaky gate call after they'd fledged about 500 metres over there. That undermines my birding credentials completely, doesn't it? What a show we've had tonight. More coming up tomorrow. Yolo, what are you going to offer us tomorrow?
Well, we've had horny fish, we've had elation, we've had predation, and the week isn't up yet. But tomorrow we will be focusing on the drama of spring with quarrelsome jackdaws.
And we'll be revealing some new science about one of our most mysterious breeding birds, the short-eared owl.
Well, I hadn't planned this, but I'm actually going to be meeting this exact bird tomorrow. And we're also going to be meeting up with some creatures that one of our team actually met on their daily walk and gave some high drama with her badgers.
Remember, you can stay up to date with all of our cameras 24/7 on the iPlayer and the BBC Springwatch page. Catch Hannah Stitfall tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Megan and I out to lunch at 12. Hannah's back at 5 in the afternoon. If you want to see all of us together, you'll have to wait until 8 o'clock at BBC 2 tomorrow night. Until then, goodbye.
The Open University is inviting you to take part in its brand new citizen science project, OU Pollinator Watch, created to help us discover more about insect pollinators. To find out how to identify a selection of insect pollinators and share your very own observations or photos, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.